8 lances of superheated plasma crossed the void in microseconds. They struck the Kalan vanguard, instantly erasing 8 capital ships from existence and shattering a 10,000-year galactic hierarchy. Sub-Commander Kale watched his primary console turn a blinding, silent white. Warlord Vraxis did not even have time to blink before the second volley armed. What kind of species builds a weapon like that? The universe just tilted on its axis, and you are going to want a front-row seat to the fallout. Subscribe now and let's watch the Empire burn together. The chronometer on Kale's display had been flashing a steady, confident green 72 hours before the sky tore open. Back then, the siege of Outpost Athelgard was just another routine subjugation. Beneath the observation deck, something shifted in the atmosphere of the flagship. Warlord Vraxis lounged in the center of the bridge. His scaled hand rested lazily on the grip of the command chair, his claws tracing the polished metal with relaxed, rhythmic clicks. Outside the viewport, 300 Kalan warships choked the space around the human colony. It was a pathetic display of resistance. Down on the irradiated surface of Outpost Athelgard, Prefect Solano was scrambling to push millions of terrified civilians into subterranean bunkers, ignoring the repeated evacuation warnings broadcast by the Kalan fleet. Up in orbit, Strike Leader Cole Vance commanded exactly 42 outdated vessels. The TSF Vanguard and its scarred sister ships hung in the dark, their drives practically coughing plasma, shields flickering under the ambient radiation of the siege. They were hopelessly outgunned, outmaneuvered and outclassed, yet they held their tight defensive formation with a stubbornness that bordered on the absurd. Kale monitored the telemetry from his tactical station. He watched the human formation. They did not run. They just sat there, bleeding thermal energy and waiting, which meant the human command was either suicidal or stalling. Still no movement? Vraxis asked. His claws tapped the armrest. None, Warlord, Kale replied. The arrogance of it defied logic. The Kalan Dominion had crushed older, wiser species for far less defiance. Humanity's bravado bordered on madness. Intercepted communications revealed Vance had received highly encrypted, cryptic orders from High Command. The directive was singular: hold the line and do not engage. Wait for what? A low hum vibrated through the flagship's deck plates. Space itself was screaming. Anomalous gravity well forming, Kale announced. He tapped his screen frantically, but the readings made no sense. Massive displacement. It is. Then the sky ruptured. A hyperspace tear shredded the battlefield. Out of that swirling darkness drifted a shape that defied every known law of naval architecture. It was gargantuan, a 14-kilometer-long dreadnought constructed of dark, brutalist metal. The TSF Leviathan had arrived. Vraxis leaned forward. His hand stopped tapping the chair's grip. The polished metal squeaked under his suddenly tightening claws. True deterrence relies on absolute supremacy. It is not just about possessing a massive weapon, but about turning the psychology of hubris against the aggressor by showing them an architecture of survival they cannot comprehend. Transmission incoming, the communications officer barked. Audio and visual. Captain Silas Mercer appeared on the main viewer. He did not look angry. He looked entirely hollowed out, a man carrying the weight of an impossible ultimatum. This is the TSF Leviathan, Mercer said. You have 60 seconds to initiate a total and immediate withdrawal of the Kalan swarm. Vraxis barked a harsh, clicking laugh. The grip on his chair relaxed slightly. 1 ship against 300. It was an impressive monument to their desperation, but it was still just 1 ship. Have you ever watched someone make a fatal mistake and been unable to stop them? Tell me below, because Kale is living it. Vraxis sneered at the holographic display, dismissing the ultimatum with a sharp flick of his wrist. Combat formation, the warlord commanded. His voice echoed across the tense, silent bridge. We will not be intimidated by a single target, no matter its size. Let their bravado die in the dark. Kale's mandibles twitched. He obeyed, routing the offensive orders through the Dominion's tactical network. Outside the massive crystalline viewport, 300 Kalan warships began their realignment. They maneuvered to encircle the gargantuan human dreadnought, but the telemetry data flooding Kale's primary console made his scales flush cold. The Leviathan was not just holding position, its sheer mass was actively generating a localized gravitational field. Kale watched in morbid fascination as shattered metal debris from earlier skirmishes was pulled into a slow, terrifying orbit around the dark hull. 30 seconds remained on the human's countdown. Weapon signatures are climbing, Kel reported. He hated how thin his voice sounded. Warlord, their power output exceeds any known reactor class. If even a fraction of those systems are operational, it violates every principle of naval engineering. Raxus did not look away from the main viewer. He stood tall, radiating the blinding hubris of an apex predator that had never known defeat. Focus all forward batteries on their main drives. We will break them. 45 seconds. The void outside the viewport seemed to hold its breath. Kale watched the thermal readouts spike exponentially along the flanks of the human vessel. He had analyzed thousands of planetary sieges. He had studied the intricate maneuvers of the Kalan swarm tearing through lesser armadas. This was entirely different. The humans were not establishing a battle formation. They were powering up an execution block. 55 seconds, which meant the swarm was out of time. Kale braced his boots against the deck plating. A low synthetic whine pierced the flagship's hull as the Leviathan's primary targeting lasers locked onto the Kalan vanguard. 58 seconds, and then the blinding white light of those superheated lances finally cleared. Where 8 Kalan capital ships had held formation just microseconds before, absolute nothingness remained. They were not simply destroyed or fractured into drifting wreckage. They were entirely atomized. The vacuum swallowed their constituent particles without a sound. Before Kale's paralyzed mind could even process the catastrophic loss, the Leviathan unleashed its secondary batteries. Railgun deployment, Kale choked out. 300 secondary weapons opened up simultaneously along the flanks of the human monument. Magnetically accelerated slugs moving at a significant fraction of light speed tore through the surrounding Kalan formation. The dense projectiles punched through advanced energy shields like brittle glass, detonating fusion cores and ripping heavily armored hulls to shreds. 77 Dominion vessels vanished from Kale's tactical board in exactly 90 seconds. The rigid tactical cohesion of the Kalan swarm completely disintegrated. Ships scattered blindly into the dark, colliding with each other in their sheer terror to escape the relentless slaughter. "Retreat!" Fraxus shrieked. The warlord's previous calm was entirely gone, replaced by raw panic. All ships, emergency hyperspace jump, now. The flagship's drives spun up with a sickening lurch, ripping a crude tear in space to flee the massacre. Space twisted violently, and then the oppressive silence of a hyperspace transit enveloped the bridge. Kale slowly looked up from his dark, sparking console. The warlord sat slumped in the center of the dim room. Raxus's scaled hand was locked onto the grip of the command chair, his knuckles completely white, his entire body trembling violently in the quiet dark. "We will be exploring the ashes of this shattered empire tomorrow. Will you be here when humanity builds its next titan?"